again to Astrophotography Japan. It's a cold winter night here in late January. It's after midnight, probably below freezing, but I'm doing some visual astronomy tonight. I've got my new Maksutov-Cassegrain MK105 telescope from SVBony, and I put it on a manual Alt-Az mount here, as you can see, but I've rigged it up a little bit. I've got a laser finder, and I've got a finder scope here with a camera that's attached to my ASIAIR Pro. And I've aligned all these things so that as I'm looking through the sky at trying to find various targets, I can actually take photographs. And those photographs, I can then use the annotation function on the ASIAIR Pro in order to identify where I'm at in the sky and then make adjustments, and it makes it a little easier for me to navigate. So if you want to hear more about this, stick around for the rest of the video. To begin with, the MK105 is a new telescope in the ever-expanding catalog of SVBony, or SVBony, however you say that, a supplier of astronomy and astrophotography gear targeted to the budget-conscious enthusiast like me. In my opinion, SVBony has a quality reputation for its products and friendly customer support. I am a fan, basically. The first lot of this new Maksutov-Cassegrain scope was shipped in January 2023 to customers like myself who had it pre-ordered. With an aperture of 105 millimeters and a focal length of 1365 millimeters, it is the most powerful scope in my collection. It has a beautiful smooth finish and solid construction. At about 2 kilograms, it does not really feel heavy at all. Under prime focus, it has a resolving power of about 1.1 arcseconds. By nature of its design, the telescope has a focal ratio of 13, making it suitable mostly for bright objects such as stars and planets and the moon. On the underside, there is an attached Vixen dovetail bar screwed into the OTA. Strangely, it is attached and positioned with a skewed balance toward the front end. It looks good in this position, but I found it to be impractical. In regular visual astronomy use, the weight of the diagonal and eyepiece makes it impossible to balance the scope with the Vixen dovetail bar in the factory configuration. So I removed it and flipped it around such that more of the dovetail extends toward the back of the scope closer to the balance point. I recommend you also do this simple modification if you own this scope. In the Maksutov-Cassegrain design, focus is achieved by a mechanism that moves the primary mirror inward and outward. This MK105 scope shares that typical design. Unlike refractors with sturdy and strong rack and pinion focus construction, this movable mirror mechanism feels weak and considerably less stable and less consistent and more finicky to achieve a truly fine focus. This is not a critique of the MK105. I am sure its focus mechanism is at least on par to competitive products. It works fine, but I have only ever owned refractors, and that is my opinion. Regarding the focus, I made a slight modification here as well. Since I had a M42 threaded generic rotation focuser, I swapped that into the MK105 for the original shorter extension ring. I now have an option to do a twist and turn fine focus in addition to the original mechanism that is still intact. And this night, my sky viewing was being done at a local baseball field near to my house. From this location, there are mostly good views all around, except for a little low-level horizon blockage to the south, thanks to the local trash incineration station. However, I found the smokestack to be very handy as a visual tool to configure my imaging guide scope in this setup. More about that soon. I arrived about 9 p.m. and stayed for nearly 5 hours until the moon was setting behind the trees to the west. Here are a few views of my telescope with special modifications I made for this night of visual astronomy. Attached is a green laser pointer, which I prefer to use cautiously, of course, instead of a red dot finder. As you might imagine, there are many airplanes in the Tokyo metropolitan area, so I need to be constantly on guard. In addition, I I attached my ASIAIR Pro Astro computer and a small imaging guide scope assembly consisting of the Ascor FMA 135 astrograph lens and the ASI 678 MC color planetary camera. At the beginning of the night, I spent a good amount of time aligning the laser with the OTA, optical tube assembly, to have pinpoint accuracy so I could see the distant tip of the laser in the center of my field of view when looking through the telescope eyepiece. This night, I used a 25mm focal length eyepiece, my widest, which provides a magnification of 54.6x power in the MK105 scope. In addition, I adjusted the imaging guide scope to also be precisely aligned with the field of view as well. It turns out that the visual field of view is significantly smaller than the photographic field of view, which I will demonstrate later. I should point out that the layout of this hardware configuration was not just random. I had to put the imaging scope out to the right and turn the ASIAIR sideways to create enough room for my head to be able to place my eye above the eyepiece. It was the only configuration that worked. Maybe I have a big head. I use my left eye to do visual astronomy. If you use your right eye, I am not sure if this layout is ideal or not. Now, based on my rather extensive experience aligning telescopes, lasers, and camera sensors, I highly recommend that you perform such alignments aimed at structures or recognizable objects on the horizon at several hundred meters distance or more. Trying to align on something in the sky, like a star, is needlessly difficult, with the only exception being the moon. On this night, my alignment was performed on the smokestack I showed earlier. About halfway up, there was a red safety light that was easy to identify looking through the eyepiece. So I locked my telescope onto that position and proceeded to align the laser on that red light, positioning it in the center of the imaging sensor field of view. You can see in this image that I did not pay particular attention to the orientation of the sensor, thinking it would not matter up in the sky. But that turned out to be a mistake in my thinking that I will discuss soon. Now, being fully aligned, I was anxious to try the setup on something familiar. Orion was too easy, so I decided my first challenge would be M44, the Beehive cluster. This one from darker skies is visible to the naked eye, but not easily seen in Yokohama. So I looked up its location in Sky Safari and found that the best nearby reference stars were Regulus and Pollux, with the Beehive cluster positioned in between. By pointing my scope, or more specifically my laser, to the area of the sky that I surmised to be the location of M44, I captured this fairly bright star. Plate solving and annotation identified it as Asellus Borealis. This is a magnitude 4.6 star. By once again referencing Sky Safari, I saw that I was very close, but a little high above the Beehive cluster. On my next movement, I identified Asellus Australis and M44, the Beehive cluster, with the next annotated preview image. To see it visually, I needed to position the cluster at the tip of the laser pointer, which was in the center of the photo. Then, looking through the eyepiece, I could see more than a dozen bright stars in the middle of this open cluster. The magnification of the MK105 was a bit too high to see it in its entirety, but nevertheless it was a beautiful view. This slide shows the visual FOV and the camera FOV as predicted by the scope display application in Sky Safari. As you can see, the photographic image results are quite a bit wider than the visual FOV through the eyepiece. This is important to keep in mind. My next target of interest was the Comet, which has been a popular news story during these days. Comet C 2022 E3 ZTF was reaching its brightest right around this time and estimated to achieve a magnitude of 5.5 on this date. For sure, stars of this magnitude would be visible in the MK105 telescope, but comets are not pinpoint furnaces of intense energy generation like stars. Comets appear as more diffuse objects that are only visible from reflected light, so magnitude 5.5 dispersed over a larger arc of sky is not necessarily bright. The comet was located in the northern skies near to the celestial North Pole, and as we all know, pointing us to that location of sky is the Big Dipper, more properly known as the constellation of Ursa Major, also known as the Great Bear. As a stopping point on my way to the comet, I decided to take a look at one star in this constellation known as Mizar. This is an interesting and popular star for viewing. It is the brightest one seen here in this photograph. Mizar also has a nearby companion known as Alcor. These two are separated by about 12 arc minutes of sky, and both are visible to the human eye if you look closely. This pair is only 83 light years away from our Sun, and they are gravitationally linked to one another and moving through space together, although rather distantly separated. If you zoom in and look closely at Mizar itself, you can notice that it too is itself a double star. These are labeled as Mizar A and Mizar B. They are separated by only 14 arc seconds in our sky. In actual physical distance, that is about 380 astronomical units. On the right of this slide is a photograph similar to the one I showed you previously, but this is only a 0.01 second exposure, not 3 seconds, and highly cropped and zoomed to just the Mizar-Alcor region. The pixelation of the photo becomes evident at this high zoom. I was hoping to see the separation of Mizar A and B, but they were not able to be resolved. This is because the ASIAIR FMA lens is only 135 millimeters in focal length, and its resolving power when used with this camera is only 3 arc seconds per pixel. That means these two stars are theoretically separated by only 5 pixels in this imaging system. That is not enough to give a clear result, although the star does look a bit elongated, suggesting it is not a single point source. I mention this because in the MK105 telescope at 1365 millimeter focal length and 54.6x magnification, Mizar A and Mizar B were both easily observable. Interestingly, Mizar A and Mizar B are also each binary stars as well, possibly even more complex, making Mizar kind of like the Russian Matryoshka doll of star systems. Binaries nested in binaries nested in binaries. Now, as you have seen so far, I have used the ASIAIR primarily to operate the camera and take preview snapshots of the sky for helpful navigation hints, but it also has the Tonight's Best list available for viewing as well. Since we are doing manual navigation, there is no go-to function, but it is a useful list to scan what is available in the sky for viewing and roughly how high they are in their trajectory across the night sky at that time. Comet E3 was listed there, right at the top of the list. At that time, it was almost at 45 degrees altitude. When I started my search, it was around 11:30 p.m., and the comet was nearly directly above Polaris, according to Sky Safari. So I tried to use Polaris and the Big Dipper star, Dubhe, to estimate its location. When I took a 3-second photograph and did plate solving, to my delight, the image captured 3 deep sky objects, the central one being IC520. Searching for this on Sky Safari, this time with the scope display tool engaged, I could see that my estimate was a bit too high. I was above the 50-degree altitude mark, and the comet was further down below. So I retargeted my position in the sky a bit lower and took another photograph. Again, no comet, but this time I found NGC 2748. After plugging that DSO designation into Sky Safari, I was now below the 50-degree altitude mark, but still too high for the comet. So again, I adjusted the AZ mount a bit lower using my laser pointer as a guide. On my next photo, with the laser still turned on, lo and behold, there she was, Comet C2022 E3 ZTF. I took the 10-second photograph seen here using preview image. At this close to the celestial North Pole, the stars do not drift very much over time, so longer exposures still looked quite good. after a little repositioning, I took another photo to include the two brighter stars that I identified later, just for fun, along with two other nearby deep sky objects. So, could I see the comet in my telescope? Well, yes I could, but it was not very distinct. It looked more like a green fuzzy mist, but it was evident. I guess the Yokohama Bortle Class 7 skies won that battle again. Nevertheless, I was enormously satisfied to find it and directly view it with my own eyes, or should I say left eye. Here are some images of the comet I took in the prior days with my other telescopes. Of the 4 significant comets that have come and gone in the last 2 years since I started astrophotography, this one was clearly the most impressive to photograph from my location here in Japan. Being a curious soul and for fun, I also took a 30-second exposure of Polaris, seen here, to determine if any star rotation would be visible at this focal length. The answer is not much. Oh, and good timing on that circumpolar satellite that photobombed my image. No, I'm not a glutton for punishment, but I am out here again for a second night in a row on a cold night in late January. The reason for this actually is because I came out much later tonight. It's after 3 a.m. in the morning, and it's very dark. The moon has set, the skies are perfectly clear, and that'll give me an opportunity to view some globular clusters. Also, I made a few modifications to my scope that I'll tell you about in a few moments. One of the modifications that I made, you can see, is I made a light shield out here for the front. Now, on episode 11 of Astrophotography Japan, I created a very similar light shield for my Samyang 14mm lens. And so I basically did the same thing here, where I used a piece of fake leather, basically, and Velcro, and cut it and sized it to be perfect for the front of this telescope. So that's one thing that I think will help with generating a little better contrast. Tonight I also have the dew heaters on because it's a bit more humid tonight, and you can see one's breath actually. So the other thing that I'm doing that is not a modification, but it's a modification to the process, is the small telescope I have here, my ASIAIR FMA 135, is I've actually aligned it this time in a way that the rectangular view is horizontal to the ground, and so it precisely matches across the azimuth axis parallel to the ground. So now I have a better understanding of what really is up and down by looking at the photograph and moving it left to right. And that'll make it much more easier to sort of navigate based on the photographs that I'm seeing. And I'll show you what I mean in just a few moments. Once again, I used a smokestack for alignment of my laser and camera sensor. I focused on the same spot that I did on the previous night, but this time you can see in this top view of the structure that the image is upright and parallel to the horizon. And here is that same bright light that I selected yesterday to target. In this upright photo, it appears to be a doorway with a round window in addition to a bright light. Here is the image from yesterday when I did not orient the sensor to the horizon. By the way, those dark lines across the image are high voltage electrical lines from the towers that pass between me and the smokestack just above the road below it. So here's the smokestack again on this night, oriented vertically and the sensor parallel to the horizon. I also aligned the laser pointer to the center of the photograph and the center of the field of view when looking into the eyepiece of the MK105 telescope. We are now all set to do some hunting of deep sky objects again. But first, let me show you why this sensor orientation is useful. These are images I took of Arcturus, which was high in the sky and conveniently located near to my first target. This shows that with only 2 full turns of the azimuth knob on the manual AZ mount, the star moves horizontally across the screen in a predictable manner. And then here, you can see that with only 1/3 turn of the altitude knob on the manual AZ mount, the star moves vertically across the screen, again in a predictable manner. Yesterday this was not the case, and to position the deep sky object in the center of the screen, I had to slightly adjust both the altitude and azimuth, moving the object in a zigzag manner to center it, which is much more difficult than it sounds, and it wastes a lot of time checking images and repeating the process over and over again until it is precisely positioned where you want it to be. With this pre-planned sensor orientation, the task is now quick and efficient. You definitely should pay attention to this little tip if you try to do this yourself. Trust me. So my first globular cluster target for the night was planned to be M3, located near to Arcturus, high in the sky. Naively, I did not realize this was going to be an especially difficult challenge, because working the Alt-Az mount close to the zenith is complicated by the fact that the azimuth movements are extremely micro-fine at these altitudes, meaning to move the camera FOV over one full FOV screen distance, I needed to turn the knob more than 10 times to scan in that direction. In my mind, I do not completely fathom the mathematics of this two-dimensional spatial relationship on curved spheres between alt and azimuth near the vertical, but from a practical perspective, it does make scanning the skies very time-consuming and frustrating close to the zenith. So I simply gave up because I did not want to waste too much time with the approaching sunrise. Moving on to the next target, I thought, uh-oh, bad start. I was batting 0 for 1. So I moved on to M5, located down around 47 degrees, a much more manageable altitude. My reference star was Untitled, which is quite bright at magnitude 2.6. I easily found it visually, and the preview photo, when played south, confirmed it was indeed Untitled. Sky Safari showed that M5 was about 10 degrees straight to the right of that star. Is that south or west? I don't know. So I moved the mount using only the azimuth knob and quickly spotted M5 in my preview photo. I then centered it in the preview image and looked into my telescope. To my surprise, I did not see anything. After a few moments of confusion, I realized that on the photo, the laser was not exactly pointing to the middle of the image anymore, as you can see once again shown here. So either the laser went out of alignment or the imaging equipment did. To test this, I repositioned M5 to the tip of the laser as shown in this image and looked again into the telescope. And there it was, the M5 globular cluster. Faint and fuzzy, but definitely visible. It dawned on me that without this preview imaging setup and an aligned laser, the chances of me finding this dim and fuzzy deep sky object was probably very slim. But here, in a matter of just a few minutes, I was able to locate and view it in the vast sky. So what happened to my alignment? Well, I think when I was messing around at the zenith, looking for M3, I must have slightly jarred the guide scope and moved it a very tiny bit, or it slipped. My laser and the MK105 field of view remained perfectly aligned, but now the camera was taking a photograph of an area slightly skewed to the right and down from the center of the telescope field of view. It was a minor inconvenience, so I decided not to fix it. Just keep in mind that to see the object I needed to follow the laser. So earlier I was looking for M3, which is almost up at the zenith, and that was a really hard one to find. It's really difficult to sort of move the scope in the azimuth direction up at the zenith because the movements are really micro-fine. But I did find M5 to the south, and that one I found relatively quickly. And now I've got it focused on M13, and I spotted this one by going to Vega, aligning it with a couple of stars to the left there, and then just off to the right, and literally
the first turn, the first snapshot I took, it was right there on the screen. So I would never be able to see it without this camera system here, because they're quite dim under these Bortle 7 skies. But this worked out fantastic, and now I can easily find these kinds of deep sky objects that are relatively dim and difficult to see. I can do it with this camera system. Works really well. So things are going very smoothly tonight. I've seen 2 globular clusters, and I'm going after one more.
The M13 Globular Cluster is magnitude 5.8, just slightly less than M5, which is 5.6. To view it, I positioned it slightly off-center at the tip of my laser, and there it was, right in the center of my eyepiece in the telescope. It looked quite similar to M5. And finally, now, at almost 4:30 in the morning, my last target, M92, was located very nearby, just a little bit lower and to the left. Here is M92, slightly dimmer at magnitude 6.4, but still visible in my eyepiece as a fuzzy haze of dim illumination against a dark background with a few pinpoint stars. The contrast on this MK105 scope was quite impressive. On this image, I did some plate solving just to show you that the camera field of view is calculated to be 3.17 degrees by 1.78 degrees of sky. A larger sized sensor would indeed be better for this kind of annotation-assisted sky navigation, but this definitely worked fine as well. I have to say that I was quite pleased with the visual performance of this SVBony MK105 telescope and the rigged-up accessories I assembled to assist me with my manual sky navigation and visual astronomy. The only inconvenience was that I had to keep switching between applications of Sky Safari and ASIAIR to get all the information I needed. ASIAIR has a sky map, a fairly new feature, but it is not well suited and functional for the way that I needed information to be displayed. I think there is good potential here for ZWO to make a few modifications to their software to customize it for manual Alt-Az usage like I demonstrated in this video. It would be a unique application and a great option for ASIAIR users. Maksutov-Cassegrain scopes are intrinsically high in focal length, which means your eyepiece views are high power and the field of view covers very little sky. So attempting to locate smaller objects other than planets or the moon or other easily identifiable stars can be very difficult. Difficult simply to find them. Sometimes, even if you are lucky enough to get them in the field of view, they might be so dim that you simply do not notice them. The other thing is that I do not always want to carry around with me a heavy and bulky star tracking mechanical mount when I venture to a nearby park or open field for viewing. This manual setup helps me easily find objects while keeping my equipment load more manageable. And there is also a certain joy in being able to use your brain and wits to navigate the sky to find objects without complete reliance on technology. Okay, I admit, the approach I took here in this video is leveraging technology, but it is not fully automated. A bit of experience is necessary. You do need patience and some know-how. Well, that's it for today. I hope you found this video entertaining and perhaps even gleaned a few ideas to help you enjoy visual astronomy even more. Visual astronomy is something that is usually shared with others, and anything that can help make the experience more enjoyable and efficient, I'm sure is definitely welcome. So, until next time, from here in Yokohama, Japan, my name is Paul Cheesegel, and I am an astrophotographer.